Welcome. My name's Hannah, and I'm a spiritual aspirant and mentor, teaching and studying in a classical tantric tradition. And today we're going to talk about depression. In my experience working with people, the grist of what most people are dealing with on a daily basis are their relationships or their emotions, or very often both. So emotions are a big theme in my work, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. And so we're going to talk about my spiritual view of depression, but I'm also going to do a lot of storytelling. And so 2024 was a majorly depressing year for me. So I'm going to say a little bit more about what happened there. And this is going to be a pretty long talk. I mean, you can already see it's an hour-long video. So I encourage you to listen to it more like a podcast. You know, this is really just me talking the whole time, so there's nothing to see here. So maybe go for a walk or clean up your house while you listen, or you can just stare at me the whole time. You have free will. You can do whatever you want, baby. So let's get started. So someone asked me on Instagram recently, is it possible to heal depression, like for good? And this video is my very long response to that very simple question. So let's get right into it. Can depression be healed for good? It's a very interesting question, but I actually don't think it's the right question. Because in my experience, depression isn't something to be permanently eradicated. It's something to understand, integrate, and transform in our life. And so let me explain what I mean by that. When people talk about like healing depression, the conversation gets a little bit complicated. So to be clear, throughout this talk today, I'm not necessarily speaking for like clinical depression. Some people experience very extreme lows and later on in their life feel like they're in remission from those extreme lows, while other people are told that their depression is incurable. And both of these realities may be true. It may be true for you. And if that feels true for you, I'm not here to argue with you. But the very idea of incurable depression does make me kind of pause, because I wonder what would shift if some of us stepped outside of a purely allopathic approach to handling mental health. But that's a conversation for another time, and we're kind of touching on those non-allopathic approaches through this conversation. So clinically, of course, there's data showing that some people do heal. So if I answered from that perspective, I'd say yes, and then the whole conversation would be over. But from a more human, experimental, and experiential lens, my answer is different. And my answer is no, you can't heal depression. And here's why. All potentials for emotion and sensation exist within each of us. It's all in here. And we're all capable of experiencing the full spectrum of emotion because we're literally just built this way. Depression is not an aberration, an anomaly of humanness. It's simply a potential of our human experience, our capacity to experience. When I think of a human being, I see a shore where there's high tide and there's low tide. While we as individuals might not shift between tides with the perfectly timed rhythm of the ocean, from my view, it's inherent to our daily, weekly, or monthly rhythm that we experience ups and we experience downs, and there is actually no getting around it. And if you try to get around it, you're turning yourself into a machine. Think about it like this. Depending on what you eat, your body will experience ups and downs. The digestion process itself calls for us to slow down and rest our energy. That is what the phrase rest and digest means, okay? So the body's already telling us to do that. So I would say that we all experience a natural cycle of up and down in our life. And that seems pretty obvious and clear probably when you hear me say it, but here's the problem. The downs are judged and othered, while the ups are celebrated and seen as the superior state. And in this experience, we fragment ourselves and become aggressive towards a completely natural part of being human. So self-aggression in any form is a guaranteed recipe for mental discomfort. So my hypothesis is basically that depression or feeling low is a natural part of human experience, but we exacerbate the effects of depression by viewing it as something that should not be. You make it worse when you believe that it doesn't belong. And of course you do. It feels fucking bad. But when you try to make any part of yourself go away, you run away from the reality of who you are in the moment. So basically what I'm suggesting is that depression is a natural part of life. And if it's natural and not an anomaly that needs to be permanently eliminated, when we're experiencing it, we just need to change our perception of it, which I'm going to get into in a little bit when I discuss the 3 things that I've done to shift my my perception of depression, okay? And so let's talk about me. Let's get some real stuff. You're hearing this from somebody who knows depression, okay? I have struggled with depression since childhood. My earliest memory of feeling depressed is when I was 10 years old. And when I really feel into myself, I can see very clearly that my childhood depression was shaped by my environment. I had one parent who was emotionally absent, and I had another that had a personality disorder that, to me, felt like a constant message was being sent to me. You're not allowed to be you. You're not allowed to be you. You have to be like me, okay? That was the environment. So growing up in a home where there was aggression towards my truth, where there wasn't very much space to authentically express emotion, it's the classic recipe for a kid shutting the fuck down. And in many ways, depression is shut down. It's a protective measure on some level, right? You shut down to protect yourself. I once heard somebody say that the opposite of depression is expression, and that really clicks for me. Because when I have space to authentically express how I'm feeling, whether it's with a person who genuinely listens to me or even just by myself writing in a journal, I feel better. I feel better, even 5% better. So there's that. We have the environmental factors behind my childhood depression, starting at the age of 10. All of that stacks up pretty well and makes a lot of sense. But sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, I wonder, was the depression in my childhood purely environmental? Or is it actually part of who I am, like my personality? You know, maybe my experiences with depression is something that was written in the stars at the time of my birth. Like maybe I'm actually wired in a way that makes depression more accessible to me. Maybe I have that curse, right? You know, I'm very sensitive to people, to the world, and through studying the system of human design, which I call astrology for psychos, I've learned that my energy type actually needs a lot of rest and time away from people, or else my mind starts to unravel in extremely disastrous ways and I'm a nightmare to be around, okay? So to put it more clearly, in the human design system, I'm a projector. That's how I was born. This is just one system, one way of looking at things. And I have this feeling that just based off of the way I have been coded in this incarnation, I am naturally set up to experience on a regular basis what most people would describe as depression. Like I'm literally just built like this. I do not have energy. I am a non-energy type, okay, according to human design. But here's the thing. When I follow my strategy and authority, according to human design, I feel a lot more balanced. And in my actual lived experience, that is absolutely true. And right now, I'm not an expert in these things, human design, except I am studying, so stay tuned. But if you're curious about anything that I just shared, just go on a YouTube rabbit hole yourself and look up human design if you want to learn a little bit more. Just not right now. I'm not the person to learn from. Later. But let's get back to this depression story with me. Earlier in my life, especially in my teens and my early 20s, I experienced extreme levels of depression. As a teenager, I was actively suicidal. And as a young adult, my depression verged on like the existential. I was like existentially depressed, like especially in my late teens, early 20s. I would just think about the state of the world, like climate change, structural racism, oh my God, the list can go on. And it would send me into a full-on bedridden depression for weeks. It was so intense. But when I look back on that, I could see part of the reason why that kept happening to me was because I had zero emotional literacy. I was too young to realize that I actually had a choice in how I can experience my life. That understanding came later, and it usually comes later, mostly because the part of our brain that processes long-term consequences doesn't fully develop until we're like 23 or 24 or 25. Okay, so that's just being a person. But as I've gotten older, my depressive experiences have alleviated significantly. It's not totally gone, like I'm going to share in a moment, but it's so much better. My mental and emotional well-being is probably the best that it's ever been, and in a little bit, I'm going to share 3 reasons why that is. If you're new to me, I take a long-winded way to paint a beautiful story so you understand, okay? But as a result of my childhood and lifelong experience with depression, a lot of my life has been about exploring how to find satisfaction and fulfillment in this world, despite often feeling very bad in my body and my mind. So for better or worse, despite the cards that I've been dealt this incarnation, I have found a way to turn my pain and struggle into a meaningful relationship with my life and with life itself. And for all of that, I'm extremely grateful. And that is the number one thing that my spiritual worldview has given me. Emotionally, I feel better than I ever have. But what's interesting is that feeling the best I have ever felt doesn't mean that I'm free of unpleasant emotions. I still have days where I feel heavy, like there's weights on my ankles, where life just feels like this existential burden, big things and sometimes even little things. It's like, oh, why do I have to fold the laundry? You know, we all have this experience. And especially as a menstruating person, it's a monthly experience. But instead of treating that monthly or even daily heaviness as a big problem that needs to be solved and eliminated, I have folded it into my understanding of what it means to be alive, okay? I don't have this huge resistance to it that I'm living through every day of my life. Because most suffering comes from resisting what is. That's what all of the yogic teachers have been saying for ages, and they're right, okay? So listen to them. When I look back on 2024, I had a surprisingly depressed year. And I was not expecting it to be this way at all. Going into 2024, I had high hopes. I thought I was going to thrive in my work. I thought I was going to feel financially secure. But instead, I spent a shocking amount of time kicking, screaming, fighting tooth and nail against reality, especially when it came to work. Oh my God. It's almost embarrassing when I look back on last year. I also more formally became a step-parent, and let's say my inner child came fucking knocking for the last year. Pretty fucking hard, but that's a story for another day. Okay. On the topic of work, I work for myself, doing things that I have dreamed of doing since I was a child, specifically writing and speaking professionally. I'm a spiritual mentor. I teach from the perspective of classical Shakta Tantra, and I've been initiated in this meditation tradition since 2015, and I have a living guru who I spend time with 3 days a week. So I spend a lot of time speaking and writing about spiritual topics. It's fucking great. I have created a great life for myself. But beyond that, I've always wanted to be an artist and a writer ever since I was a kid. So it's a blessing that I get to sustain my life by doing what I love, because now it's like the majority of what I do. It's how I spend most of my days. But 2024, something happened. And something got really fucking weird for me. And this is what happened, and this is why I got so depressed. For some reason, I started resisting myself. I started to try to talk myself into doing something totally different in my work. I convinced myself that I needed to change everything that I was doing. And what's wild is that I didn't even realize that I was doing this to myself. I can see it so clearly now. Like, how could I have missed that? But I did. And so here's what happened. Here's why I was trying to convince myself to change trajectories. I had just spent 2 years working as a spiritual mentor, teaching courses, giving talks, working one-on-one with people, running my 3rd business in my career so far. And if you're completely new to me, by the way, I have a Patreon where I have 50 talks that I've given over the past 3 years. So if you ever want to learn with me directly, that's a really good place to start. But 2024 comes around, and I start having this weird nagging feeling. Like I wanted to move away completely from doing all of this spiritual work. And it really would like torture me and haunt me throughout my days and even at night. And looking back, I can see that all of that stuff that was happening was avoidance in disguise. But at the time, I chalked up my desire to want to change my career up to two things. The first one had to do with marketing, okay? And so I have never enjoyed marketing my spiritual services. It has always felt very weird to me, especially because I come from a lineage that's entirely word of mouth. But I pushed through that discomfort over the years because, well, I have 4 planets in Capricorn, so I'm fucked. And marketing is literally the only way to get eyes on what you're doing. Marketing is the art of getting eyes on what you're doing. So it just was logical. I was like, well, I guess I have to fucking do this. But I hated it the whole time. And then number 2, I had a very legitimate worry that being a teacher was somehow detrimental to my personal spiritual path. And on some level, there is immense truth to that because the ego of the spiritual teacher is literally the most formidable one of all. And so my discernment was definitely on with it because I've heard my guru say this for like a decade. But at the same time, I can absolutely feel in myself that I'm growing. Okay, I'm still growing despite this thing that I'm doing. So it can't all be for nothing, okay? So anywho, here I am having these second thoughts about teaching spiritually. But at the same time, I'm like really confused. It's like, okay, that feels true. Like, I hate marketing. I don't want to be a spiritual teacher, but I'm also confused. Because at the core of it all, I wanted to help people. This is what was so confusing. Wanting to help people, oh my God. Wanting to help people was why I started doing this work in the first place. Helping people is my bottom line. And that part of me has never changed this whole time. And so eventually I came across this idea. I got an inspiration to enroll in a relationship coach training with a program that's run by Jason Gaddis, whose work literally saved my life like 6 years ago. So I knew he would be a really good guide for me. And this idea made a lot of sense. I thought I really had it figured out. I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna what I'm gonna do. Because in my experience as a spiritual mentor, most of what I talk about with people is their relationships, period. As a mentor, I am almost exclusively talking with people about their relationships with other people. Because as integral practitioners, as spiritual aspirants who are trying to live our spirituality in our daily life, the number one thing that tests us is other people. So people are our training ground spiritually. That has always been so obvious to me. There's so much growth there. And it's exactly why, historically, people have retired to monasteries to advance their spiritual path. You know, you just remove yourself from the fuss, from the people, the city, the noise, and suddenly it's a hell of a lot easier to meditate on the stillness of the inner self, right? I mean, it makes sense why you would do that. But that way of life, removing yourself from the world, not only is it completely inaccessible to most people, but it's also deeply uninteresting. Most people don't want to do that. They want to be in relationships, right? They want to have a job, or maybe not. But for the average person, life itself needs to become the spiritual practice. That's the way. That's the way that we have to do it. So people become our yoga studio. People become our monastery. And the way that you look at them, the way that you engage with them, the way that you relate with them, that becomes your practice as a yogini or as a yogi. So finding harmony in the midst of the chaos of change and evolution, that's modern yoga from my point of view, okay? So there's all that. I'm having all these thoughts, okay? And I'm like, okay, most people are struggling in their relationships. I don't want to do the spiritual thing anymore. So I can keep doing the same transformative work with people, but just in like a secular way. As a relationship coach, I'd actually be able to expand my base of clients because I don't need someone to be on board with the idea of God or spirit or consciousness to help them in their marriage, right? I was like, oh, I could like help like 10 times more people, right? That's my bottom line, isn't it? So I enrolled in a year-long training. I got my certification, and honestly, it was intense. I learned so much, so many interpersonal and professional skills that I actively still use. I'm so grateful for it. By the way, the program is through the relationship school, and I recommend it. I sincerely recommend it. It's very good. But as 2024 progressed, I have my certification, I have all these new skills, I'm gonna be the relationship coach, I started a new Instagram. I kept trying to reinvent myself as this secular guide, and something was off. And very little of what I was doing was working. I was shocked. I was like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Well, actually, my one-on-one work with people was working. I was helping people, but the way that I was trying to market myself and find new people to work with, that was the thing that was not working. It had zero magnetism. And the reason why? Because the whole thing was actually completely inauthentic. Trying to be a secular guide was so fucking inauthentic to who I actually am. And by the end of the year, do you know what happened? I was literally broke. I am not exaggerating, like wondering how it's gonna work out next month. I have been broke a lot in my life, but in 2024, I felt like I was existentially broke. Like I was teetering on the edge of having nothing materially and also feeling spiritually and psychically empty. Everything was broke. Everything was broke. Like I had no idea what the fuck I was doing or what the fuck to do next. I was broke on every level of my being. And I had multiple moments. I remember, this is when you know it's bad. When you're regretting every choice you've ever made in your life. Have you ever been there? I'm like, the fact that I'm here right now is my own damn fault. I am in complete despair, you know? Oh, it's the worst. And that feeling is actually really out of character for me because I am someone who has devoted my life to grace, okay? The power of evolution, which my Talk Grace 101 is free on Patreon, by the way. So October rolls around and I finally wake up to the horrors. I wake up from the haze of trying to be something that I'm not, from all of the depression that came along with it. And by the way, I'm literally telling you right now what the secret key to working with depression is, okay? So listen. I got depressed because I was trying to be something that I'm not, okay? So if you feel depressed, it's very likely that you are doing or being something that is inauthentic to you. And I don't know what that thing is for you. But maybe when I say that, there is a pang in your heart or a flicker in your mind that knows exactly where you're being inauthentic. Maybe you already know exactly what it is. Because a huge part of depression is this. It's what happens when we're out of touch with the core of our being. When we stop respecting the beauty of our individuality, okay? So that's your key. Being unauthentic equals depression. So anyway, back to what I'm saying. October comes around and I'm at the bottom of my depression. And I realize I need to stop pretending that I don't want to write and talk about spiritual topics for the rest of my life. It is literally the only thing on my mind at all times. And yes, relationships are interesting to me for sure. There's no doubt. I wouldn't have done the training if it wasn't true. But I barely think about it. It's like it's not on my mind. Relationships aren't like on my mind all the time. Mostly because I'm in a healthy relationship. But also it's just like not my top priority. And historically, relationships for me only take up space in my mind when I'm having a bad relationship or like a relationship problem. And now I like don't struggle with that at all because I chose a really good partner. And so like it's crazy how much easier your life will get when you link up with the right person or people, you know, thank God. But this is the thing. When something isn't my top mental priority, it's extremely difficult to write marketing content for it. It is so freaking hard. It's like pulling my teeth out. And whatever I do manage to create in that state of inauthenticity, it's dull. It's uninspired. It's just so boring. It's like, ick. It's like, oh, I can't believe she wrote that. But at the time, I did not even have words for like why I needed to finally admit that spirituality is the vocational path for this incarnation for me. It was not until I encountered human design actually, and it gave me something that I didn't even know that I needed, which was a permission slip to take my interests seriously and to own them as a part of who I actually am and to see them in the context of my personal evolution in this incarnation, to not see it as a waste of time, right? So to not see the things I'm interested in as a waste of time. So basically what I'm saying is, when I look back on 2024, I was in a pit of depression because I was resisting something deeply true about myself. And this is a huge takeaway for you. This is a huge takeaway for you right now. One of the main causes of depression is living from a state of inauthenticity, period. And like I said, I cannot tell you what your inauthenticity is. That's your path of discovery. That's your journey of self-exploration. But maybe you already know. Maybe you can feel exactly how you're being inauthentic and you hate me right now. And if you need someone to talk to about it, to problem solve, to work through it, I am here for you, okay? I work with people one-on-one all the time about this kind of stuff, and so there's links in the description if you want to connect with me. So that was a lot. It's been 25 minutes already, and I haven't even talked about the 3 things, but this is literally how I work when I give talks, so get used to it. Let's transition to the 3 things that helped me shift my expression of depression, my experience of depression, okay? So the 3 things are: 1, allowing and welcoming all states into my experience and not self-aggressing; 2, giving harm a seat at the table in my life; and 3, rooting myself deeply in a supportive spiritual worldview. Okay, those are the 3 things. Let's start with number 1. Number 1, allowing and welcoming all states of being into my experience. Not self-aggressing against any aspects of my humanity that are simply a part of being alive. So here's the thing. You will begin to stop self-aggressing when you start to see emotions as feedback. Not just feedback, but extremely valuable pieces of feedback. Data about how you're doing with what's happening in your reality. Now, yeah, emotions can sometimes feel misplaced, overblown, and possibly even erroneous. But that sort of an experience usually happens way more when we're really out of touch with ourselves and deeply under-resourced. And so that's very real, very real. But have you ever seen the movie Spirited Away? If you haven't, you need to go watch it as soon as possible. Literally stop right now and go watch it. But if you have, real quick, let's just talk about the stink spirit. Let's talk about the stink spirit. The big, globby, smelly booger creature that visits the bathhouse, and nobody wants to deal with him, right? Remember? But in the movie, Sen, the main character, gets assigned to take care of this guy. She's on booger duty. And at first, she is repulsed by this person, but she does her job. She stays with him. And then at one point, she falls into the bath with him, and as she struggles under the water, he grabs her and pulls her into his body. And suddenly, she feels a thorn in his side, and immediately she realizes, like, oh, this booger man is here because he needs help. So she starts pulling on the thorn, only to discover it's a bicycle handle. And once she pulls it out with all the help of the people in the bathhouse, it's like unplugging a clogged drain, and all of this trash pours out of him. All of this refuse, all of this junk, it's all gushing out. And once he's liberated from the weight of all of this, he sighs, and he leaves all of this gold for the workers and gratitude for all the people who helped him, right? And so what initially seemed like a nasty and unwelcome thing turned out to be a blessing for the entire staff at the bathhouse. So my question for you is, if you want to stop self-aggressing, is how often are you visited by the stink spirit in your own mind? How often? It might be hard to believe, but every emotion, every thought, and even every bout of depression that you have enters your mind with a purpose. It's not a mistake, it's feedback. It's trying to do something for you. But before you wake up to the feedback of emotions, your emotions, this experience of depression, it's all just going to feel like the stink spirit. It's all just going to feel like an unwelcome guest. It's all just going to feel like something repulsive and unlovable that you instinctively try to keep out of the bathhouse, right? Of course you do. Of course you do that. You cannot help but cover your nose when something stinks and you don't know what it is, right? So every single emotion that we are capable of offers us feedback that we need to acknowledge and engage with. This is the key. It's feedback. So just like the river spirit, your most unpleasant emotions will persist until you allow them to fulfill their purpose, okay? So, like I said, you can shift your experience of depression by allowing and welcoming all states into your experience. You have to find a way to accept them, and you have to reframe their role in your life, period. And I really like using this example of the stink spirit because of the way that he approached her. There's so much deep imagery and metaphor in this example in Spirited Away. It's the way that he interacted with her. He grabbed her. He held her close to his body. And for Sen, when this emotion, the stink spirit, grabbed her, that was really scary and confusing and unwanted, actually. But I actually think that the biggest emotions that we feel are in their own way trying to hold us close to them. The bigger the emotion, the bigger the message. And these big emotions will keep holding us close until we finally do the work of trying to see the intelligence in their presence, okay? And the harder it is to get away from an emotion, the more it's trying to tell you something. It's holding you fucking tight until you wake up and see what it's trying to tell you. So one of the biggest shifts I made in my emotional life was learning to reframe the presence of emotions, not as a personal failing, but as an extremely valuable feedback system. Extremely valuable. My emotions are telling me something very important every day about my environment, about the choices that I'm making. And like I said earlier, I was depressed last year because I was trying to change who I was. My emotions were not random. They were feedback about the choices that I was making. So all of it was very, very, very intelligent. So for you who is listening, when you cut yourself off from your emotions, you cut yourself off from one of the most reliable feedback systems that you have. And this is one of the main reasons why people end up in midlife crises, okay? People will spend their whole lives ignoring who they really are, ignoring how they really feel. And then one day they have a meltdown, quit their job, and burn their life to the ground, but they're 55 years old, okay? You can avoid your midlife crisis right now by learning how to see your emotions for what they are now. Whoever's listening, I don't know how old you are, okay? Your emotions are feedback, okay? That was the first point that I want to make. Here's the second thing that helped with my depression. Giving harm a seat at the table in my life, okay? We all experience trauma. Welcome to your human birth. I don't know if you've noticed. There's actually no avoiding trauma. Just growing up with parents who have their own value systems, ones that do not necessarily align with who you are, can create exactly what people label as trauma, okay? I personally prefer the word harm in this context because trauma is a very loaded word, but of course, trauma exists on a spectrum. Some experiences are minor, other experiences are devastating. And here's something that I've always found very interesting. Two people can go through the exact same traumatic event and walk away with completely different emotional outcomes. There have been studies on people who survive car accidents together. The same accident, the same moment in time, two different people. One person recovers, the other person doesn't. Why? Because they're different people. They enter into the same traumatic experience with different histories, different narratives, and different belief systems. And this part is critical. They may have had different support systems after the traumatic event. So this is something that you really need to understand. Trauma, as we commonly use the word today, is not just about the traumatic event, the thing that happened. The real damage that causes what we understand to be trauma happens when there's no care after the event. No one to acknowledge what happened to us. No one to help you process it. And what is a chronic lack of acknowledgement and processing, that's what CPTSD is, which I definitely have and had, okay? I have worked to overcome this. So here's a really simple example from my own life related to what we're talking about here. Growing up, especially in my teen years, my parents screamed at each other constantly, fighting about God knows what. I mean, my mom, she had her personality disorder. She was nearly impossible to deal with, so that's already a fucking boulder to Sisyphean push up the hill. And then we have my dad, and he's just trying to negotiate with a terrorist who refused to be negotiated with. So it was absolutely a crazy-making situation for everybody involved. And at any age, listening to people scream at each other is activating to the nervous system, pretty much, period. And sure, there's some cultural differences in how conflict is expressed. As a white American, there's space for me to acknowledge that the whole people should be quiet and civilized and conflict idea is a Eurocentric belief, right? But still, if you're growing up in a house where people are constantly yelling, where there's unresolved tension all the time, that's dysregulating. And you know what makes it all even fucking worse? No one ever talks about it. That's how you make it 10 times worse. No one's ever gonna talk about it. When you hear your parents scream at each other night after night after night, but they never turn to you and they never ask, hey, are you doing okay? How is that for you? Never. I have often thought that my entire childhood would have been so different if just one of them had checked in with me, if just one of them had checked in with me. But none of them ever did. Nobody ever did. Nothing was ever acknowledged. I am 33 years old and nothing will ever be acknowledged because that's who my parents are, okay? So I quietly and unconsciously internalized a very powerful narrative growing up in this environment. I don't matter. My feelings about what's happening around me don't matter because nobody's fucking asking. If either of my parents had been able to self-reflect, even just a little bit, if they had considered the impact of their behavior on me, that alone would have been revolutionary. That alone could have in some ways prevented the CPTSD symptoms that I have experienced throughout my adulthood. And that is the power of people actually working through problems, conflict, and pain together. It's incredibly healing and incredibly traumatic when there's none of that happening, okay? Because here's the thing. So often, we are first injured relationally. This is just a tale as old as time. But we also heal relationally. So trauma isn't just about the event itself. You could have parents who fight, but then they sit you down and they ask you how you're doing. They ask you if it was scary for you to hear them yelling. They give you space to share your experience authentically and without judgment. They come up with a plan for how to handle situations like that in the future. Everything I just said, that's how you mitigate trauma. It's the absence of acknowledgement, the lack of recognition, whether external or internal, that allows trauma to take root and persist in someone's mind and heart, okay? But luckily for me, for whatever reason, I'm a student of growth, evolution, and transmuting harm. It could be my channel of struggle in human design, but we'll get to that another day. And one of my gifts, my experiences in my life have given me, is the will, the powerful will to end this cycle of ignoring. A cycle that has likely persisted in my family lineage for generations. So the harm that I have experienced has given me a profound gift. It has given me a desire to do better, a desire to repair, and to acknowledge with myself and all of the people I encounter in my life what's really going on, and checking in with people. So here's an example. Now, in 2025, whenever I see my stepdaughter going through something, or if she overhears something kind of intense, I'll just ask her what it was like for her. What's that like for you? What was that like for you? And most of the time she's fine. I have to believe her. But showing up as someone who cares about the impact, even if nothing happened, that alone is transformative. That alone creates so much safety. So the harm that I have experienced, it has become an agent of positive change, not just in my life, but in the lives of the people who are closest to me. And that is one of the gifts that my experiences have given me. Such a blessing, okay? Now, I just gave you a taste of what it means to give harm a seat at the table. But when I work as a spiritual mentor, one of the first things that I do is I help people to get curious about their worldview, their narrative about their life and their experiences. Because on the spiritual path, investigating and clarifying your worldview is a completely essential step to get where you want to go. You have to do this. Your worldview becomes the ground of your spiritual growth. It's like soil. And the way that you prepare the soil, that is what sets the stage for whether things will grow or not. So here's an example of what I mean. Bear with me through this, by the way. Please bear with me. You will understand where this is going soon. There's a fundamental difference between a materialist scientific worldview and a non-dual spiritual worldview. Now, before I say any of this, let me be clear. I am not anti-science. I simply acknowledge it as a worldview. And for me, the worldview of materialism just does not work. So I don't fully engage with it, okay? There's nothing wrong with it. It's a choice. It's something that I respect, but it's not my entire view, okay? But this is the thing that you need to know. Your worldview is something that you're first given. It's handed to you by your culture, your family, and your education. But through the course of your life, and especially if you're interested in taking control of your experience of your life, your worldview becomes something that you begin to consciously choose, okay? And sometimes that new worldview is radically different from the one that you inherited. Other times, it just takes a few adjustments, right? But the way that you choose to see the world directly shapes what you're able to experience in the world. The way that you choose to see the world directly shapes what you're able to experience in the world, which makes a huge consideration for the spiritual path, okay? Makes this a huge consideration for the spiritual path. So let's break this down. In a materialist worldview, the belief is that consciousness comes from matter. First, there's physical matter, atoms, molecules, biological processes, and through evolution and chemical processes, at some point, consciousness emerges as a byproduct of the physical world. Okay, that's the materialist view of reality. A non-dual spiritual view, which is the view that I take, actually flips this concept entirely. It says that matter comes from consciousness, that consciousness is the foundation of everything, down to the smallest particles, down to the quantum foam of reality, okay? So from consciousness, the possibility of matter arises. It's totally flipped. Or in more spiritual terms, density happens. A physical object is not just a solid thing, it's a condensation of consciousness, a slowed down vibration of awareness itself, okay? This is consciousness, my Stanley mug. Now, the differences here might seem small, but it's actually a really big deal because these two worldviews actually present completely different possibilities for you in your own mind and your own experience of life. If you're a materialist who views consciousness as the result of matter, by way of the logic of your view, there are limits on what is possible in your consciousness because matter has limits. Matter is finite. So if you're a materialist, you literally view the human mind as a thing with limits. You view consciousness as a thing with limits. There's only so far you can go in the mind, right? Because there's limits. How many more times do I have to say that? And certainly, there are limits of what can be known, right? But if you've been hearing anything about the research that's been done on telepathy recently, like the telepathy tapes, this materialist view is actually being put strongly into question right now, so it's something to consider. The opposite of the materialist view is the spiritual view. If matter arises from consciousness, and if consciousness is unlimited, then the possibilities within matter are also unlimited. Of course, this is within reason. There are physical laws that keep us from materializing objects out of thin air, at least for now. But if you're curious to explore this deeper, I teach about the 36 tattvas, the 36 gradations of consciousness in my course, The Ego 101, which you can find on my Patreon, okay? This is a classical tantric philosophy, specifically from the Kashmiri Shaivite tradition, and it's a really powerful introduction to non-dual spirituality, if that's something that you're interested in. If you love dense explanations, my Ego 101 class is gonna be chef's kiss, okay? So basically, what I'm saying is this. If you take on a non-dual worldview, you don't have limits on what's possible in your own consciousness. Because the foundation of everything, consciousness itself, is unlimited. That opens up an entirely new playing field for spiritual experiences, spiritual expansion, and advancement, okay? But in the materialist view, there's a ceiling. There's a limit to what's considered possible in the mind. And if you never investigate this, if you never even question it, you will inevitably plateau on your spiritual path. This is exactly what happens. Because your beliefs about what's possible for you will keep you from going to the next level. Your limited beliefs. So at some point, you have to either loosen up those beliefs, or you need to have an experience that forces you to question reality itself, okay? And some people take psychedelics for this. Other people have paranormal experiences. But one way or the other, you cannot truly become a mystic, a direct experiencer of reality, without having an experience that shakes your understanding of reality to its core. But all of this is a topic maybe for another time. Now, Hannah, what the hell does this have to do with giving harm a seat at the table? You might be wondering. Well, when I talk about the table, it's a metaphor for something bigger. It's a metaphor for our worldview. So what I want you to do is think of your worldview as this grand table in your mind. And it has many different seats around it. And each seat is assigned to a different possibility in your experience, or possibly even a different emotion. So it's like a gathering of sorts of every part of yourself in your mind at this grand table. But here's the thing. Most people, without even realize it, keep a limited guest list at their table in their mind. And maybe their guest list is of like allowed people at the table are success, joy, oh, pleasure can come, yeah, oh, good feelings can come, harmony definitely is invited, mild discomfort is fine, you're allowed, you can come to the party. These are the experiences that we have decided are allowed to exist in our reality. They're allowed, they can sit at the table. But everything else, sadness, failure, discord, depression, harm, these experiences, they're not invited. They're not invited into the fold of your worldview. And it's not that people don't know that these things exist. We definitely know that these things exist, but we unconsciously believe that the very presence of these things is an aberration. That the very existence of these experiences is a glitch in the code of reality. But here's the thing, folks, it's fucking not. It's not. The presence of harm, the presence of terrible acts, is not some sort of cosmic mistake. It's the natural result of everything that has ever happened, what some traditions refer to as karma, or the law of cause and effect. And beyond all of this, harm is actually necessary, okay? It's actually part of how evolution happens on both a biological and spiritual level, okay? So species evolve because of their limitations in their environment. The absence of something forces an adaptation. So in a way, the presence of harm in reality can be seen as a force of evolution in our life. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that we're seeking out harm or advocating for it. That's not what I mean. It's something a little bit more subtle and nuanced. What it does mean is that we need to at least give it a seat at the table in our mind. Because if we don't, we will always, on some level, be living in resistance to reality. Harm, struggle, discord, pain, sadness, they all play a role in this game of our life. And you could say that in every moment, there are three processes always occurring in our life and in our mind: creation, preservation, destruction. Just look at your body. Right now, your body is producing new cells, which is creation, sustaining your existence, which is preservation, and breaking down all of the food that you ate earlier, which is destruction. So think about it like this: every single time you eat lunch, you are living out the principle of harm in your frickin' body. Because what is most harmful to us is often rooted in destruction. Whether it's losing something or someone, or having an experience so painful that it shatters everything that we once believed to be true. That's what harm usually is. It's destruction. So if creation, preservation, and destruction are things that are happening all the time, harm is as natural as air. And if you don't give it a seat at the table, you're essentially saying that something as fundamental as gravity should not be existing. But it does. So what does all of this have to do with depression? Well, giving harm a seat at the table has helped me with my depression because it creates space. It's a way of digesting my life. Giving harm a seat at the table is part of my emotional digestive system. My digestive system. And as a guide, I pay very close attention to what I hear people saying when I'm working with them. And you know what's one thing I've noticed? Most people have a deep desire to feel whole. They may not even know that that's what that means, but there's this inscrutable longing for wholeness that they're always chasing. And you know what the secret is to feeling whole? It's actually this: giving every aspect of reality a seat at the table in your worldview. That is the secret thing to do. You have to give every experience you internally have a role in your evolutionary process. That's how you feel whole. You want to feel whole? Give it a role. View nothing as an aberration. View nothing as an accident. View nothing as an anomaly. You'll start feeling pretty fucking whole. Because the worst thing you can do for your mental health is to view any part of yourself as not allowed. Mental health 101. Not allowed, you're going to feel like shit, okay? So you have to find a way to integrate the presence of depression into your worldview and ideally into your spiritual path, okay? Now, allowing all of existence into your worldview requires some creative thinking. This is my opinion. It takes some creative thinking. And personally, I love this analogy of the huge table seated with every aspect of myself. It's kind of like there's like this high council meeting in the Lord of the Rings. It's like we're in Middle Earth. And at the head of this great grand table in Middle Earth is my future self. This version of me that has evolved, who's digested all of the fallout from my life. She's wise. She's grounded. Who's next to her? Me. In my present iteration, like right now, I'm the court jester, right? And when a particular emotion is dominating in my life, it's like it's standing up at the table and it's speaking. And everybody else quiets down and listens. And my task is to listen to whatever that emotion is saying. I have to listen to what depression is saying without judgment. This is huge. If depression is speaking at the table, I need to hear it out. No judgment, no correction. I have to assume that it has something worthwhile to say. I have to greet it with loving kindness. I have to let it have its tantrum. I have to let it cry. I have to let it groan and complain, and then I have to pay attention to the subtext of all this groaning. What is it actually saying? What does it actually need? Because like I said earlier, emotions are feedback. And within this analogy, we also have future me sitting at the head of the table. And when I think about her, this version of me who is grounded, successful, wise, I know she didn't let depression dominate the conversation forever. So it's not about letting depression take over the conversation indefinitely. How could I possibly become the grounded, successful version of myself of my dreams if I ever let depression take over the conversation at the table? So at some point, depression needs to quiet down. And we need to let somebody else speak at the table, maybe joy, curiosity. So how do we do this? The shift happens when you're ready to look for the benefit in the experiences that you have, and especially the difficult experiences that you've had. Because if you survive an adverse situation, if you make it out alive, there's always some kind of a benefit. There's always some kind of a benefit. And this is a very complex and mature way of thinking, because acknowledging benefit isn't necessarily saying that what you went through was good, or that you're like really overjoyed and grateful for it. That's not what I'm saying. It's not about pretending that the pain that you experienced is something that you need to be celebrating right this second. It's about taking a real, honest look at how the things that you have been through have molded you. How has it molded you? How has it shaped you into somebody who's more capable of making the world a better place exactly because of the pain that you felt? How has it made you more capable of showing up in relationships in a healthier way and living as an example of what's possible? How has it made you somebody who now has the skills to create something so beautiful in the world that could not exist if not for the pain you have felt, okay? And when you truly acknowledge the benefit, something starts to shift. The emotional charge around the harm that you experienced begins to loosen. It loosens the fuck up. Now, the pain itself may never fully go away. That's one thing to understand. But you will no longer be held hostage by the belief that it was some sort of an aberration, some sort of a mistake that never should have happened. That is so liberating when you start to see your life in that way. Because the truth is, it did happen. And there's actually nothing you can do to change the past. And complaining about it, unfortunately, doesn't undo it. Ignoring it, unfortunately, doesn't actually make it disappear. So what can you do? You can turn shit into gold. You can explore how all of those painful experiences have actually equipped you with the exact skills, the exact awareness, and the exact mindset that you need to succeed in your life, okay? Now, I go much deeper into this putting harm at a seat at the table thing in my Patreon talk called Reality is Algorithmic. And I share more about the benefits of the harm that I've experienced in that talk. It's an hour and a half long. But the example that I always come back to when I think about harm at the seat of the table in my life is my mother's alcoholism. If I could wave a magic wand, I would have loved to have a normal mom, a sober mom, a mom without a personality disorder, a mom who wasn't an addict. That would have been sick. Oh, bring it on. But here's the thing. If I hadn't been raised by somebody who was unpredictable and scary, someone I had to watch closely, someone I had to pay attention to for my own safety, I would not be the artist or the guide that I am today, period. Because when you grow up with an addict, you get very good at noticing subtle changes. It just is what happens for your survival. Is mom drunk? Is she safe to be around right now? Does her breath smell? All these sorts of things. You get very observant. Children of addicts are often the most incredibly observant adults you will ever meet because they had to be. We had to be. Now, I could be angry about the circumstances that led to my ability to notice everything, my incredible skills of observation. Or I could accept that it happened and recognize that the past can't be changed and use the gifts I was given in the present and in the future. Those are my options. Because the truth is, this is the truth, I am a good guide because of my mom's alcoholism. I notice everything about whoever it is that I'm speaking to. When someone is talking, I notice every micro expression. I notice every word choice. I notice every subtle shift in their energy. I don't even have to try. I was just built like this. And that's like a gift that came directly from the harm that I experienced. My past shaped me into somebody who's deeply observant. And honestly, I am so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that. And here's the thing. I did not get to that place of gratitude until I first gave depression a voice at my table. I let it complain. I let it groan. I let it feel like a victim. I gave it time to express itself. But future me, the one at the head of the table, she did not let depression talk forever. She challenged it. She asked it to grow the fuck up. She told it, look at the cards that you have been given and ask yourself, can you play them to their fullest? Because we all have been dealt a hand in this lifetime. But the real question is, how well can you play your cards? Because learning how to play the cards that you have been given really well, that is the secret of fulfillment in this life. And giving harm a seat at the table, that has been a key part of learning how to play my cards to the max, to the maximum. It's the secret you don't want to hear, but it's the secret that's going to set you free, okay? Now, before I transition to my final point, I want to briefly return to something that I said earlier about what actually causes trauma. We already know that a lack of care or acknowledgement after a traumatic event is one of the biggest factors in how trauma can take root in our life. But there's another thing that can make trauma even worse. Okay, so this is something we're going to transition to the next point here. An inability to place the traumatic event within the world that you live in. An inability to place the traumatic event within the world that you live in. So in other words, not having a philosophical or spiritual framework that allows for trauma to exist as part of reality. Because sometimes the most traumatizing part of an experience isn't just the pain itself, it's actually what comes after. It's like this confusing feeling of trying to figure out how the hell you can keep living in a world where that level of suffering is even possible. It's like how could a loving God create this pain sort of a feeling? And this is where spiritual philosophy becomes completely essential, because there's one level of giving harm a seat at the table, like from a Western developmental perspective, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. And then there's something deeper. There's giving harm a seat at the table in your spiritual or philosophical worldview, okay? And it's one thing to accept that depression can exist within you, okay? That makes sense. It's like a possibility in our humanness, like I was saying earlier. But what about the trauma that exists like out in the world? Like, how do we make peace with the presence of evil? How do we reckon with the fact that unspeakable things can happen, do happen, and will continue to happen? How do we deal with all that stuff, okay? That's where spiritual philosophy comes in, baby. That's how we reckon with all of this stuff. So this leads me to my final point, okay? Number 3, my spiritual worldview is the number one thing that has helped me to befriend the presence of depression in my life. Because my spiritual worldview contextualizes everything. There are no loopholes. There's no mental gymnastics to justify the existence of harm or evil. There is a very clear framework through which to understand everything. The good, the bad, and everything in between. And when I can see the entire world within the context of a greater spiritual reality, something massive shifts inside of me. I spend less time griping over the mere existence of harm, trauma, pain, genocide, disease, and more time using adversity for my own spiritual growth. Because in my view, everything is grist for the mill of my spiritual process. And at the core of my spiritual worldview is the philosophy of grace, anugraha in Sanskrit, a teaching that comes from the tradition that I've been initiated into for the last 10 years, which is classical Shakti Tantra or Mahashakti Yoga, okay? I actually have a 2-part series on my Patreon called Grace 101 that goes into depth about this philosophy of grace, and the first part is free to listen to. If you're curious, you just have to become a free member and it's all yours, okay? But let's go over the basics of grace. So grace is the force of evolution at work in the universe. It's the spark of adaptation and creation that keeps everything growing in our reality. It keeps everything expanding. It keeps everything transforming. It's the spark of life and evolution at work in reality. Now, I go much deeper into this idea in my talk. It actually takes me about 4 hours between 2 talks to fully explain it. But one of the greatest gifts that grace has given me is an unshakable feeling of faith in my life. A faith that whatever life presents to me, I mean whatever, like nuclear war, on some level, it will be of spiritual benefit to me. And this feeling of faith is what makes someone indestructible. It's what makes someone able to endure the ups and downs of emotion, because at the deepest level, there is a quiet knowing that everything you experience is fuel for the fire of your awakening process, even if that fuel happens to look like several months of depression in 2024. I've had worse things happen, by the way. 2024 was just fucking weird. Now, here's how I describe my experience of faith in grace. I have a deep, unshakable, unquestionable feeling that I am always on an upward trajectory. I trust this more than anything in my life. I have been doing this and growing my faith for 10 years, and at this point, there is absolutely nothing more real to me than knowing that I am always moving forward. I am always moving closer and closer to more consciousness, more awareness, closer to future me, the one who is sitting at the head of the table. I have no doubt. I have no doubt about it. Even in the depression, she's there at the head of the table, okay? So sinking deeply into an integral, non-dual spiritual worldview has been the single biggest factor in alleviating depression in my life, period, okay? And now I teach people how to apply simple, non-dual spiritual principles to transform their experience of life every single day, and it is my great pleasure. It is my great pleasure. I work with people all the time who come to me because they feel like therapy is not solving their problems anymore. There's nothing wrong with therapy. They made progress, absolutely. It helped with a lot of stuff. But at some point, it starts to feel like they've hit a plateau in their healing. And here's what I've seen over and over and over and over again with these people who feel like they're at the end of therapy. That plateau is philosophical. That plateau is philosophical. You're not stuck because you haven't done enough healing. You've probably done enough. You're stuck because your worldview is keeping you where you are. Listen to me. You're stuck because your worldview is keeping you where you are. And I have seen again and again that the missing piece for most people after years of healing work, valuable therapeutic healing work, is spiritual philosophy. Real, grounded, no loopholes, holds up no matter what, spiritual philosophy. That's what people need to take themselves to the next level. I have seen this again and again. And that's exactly what I help people to do every day, either one-on-one through mentorship work, where I meet with you every couple of weeks, or through my Patreon, where we do calls every couple of weeks with the community for Q&A. So let's wrap this up with a little summary of what we learned today. Can depression be healed for good? Question. Well, that depends on how we define healing. Clinically, some people experience remission, but from a broader human and spiritual perspective, depression isn't an anomaly. It's not something to be removed. It's an inherent part of the emotional spectrum. So it's not that it needs to be healed in the sense of being removed. It needs to be integrated into the fullness of who we are. And resisting it is exactly what makes it worse, while reframing it as a part of the natural ebb and flow of life will give you a more sustainable relationship with it, okay? So that's a takeaway from today. And through my own lifelong experience with depression, I was able to identify 3 key shifts that transformed how I engage with it, okay? Allowing all states into my experience. So instead of self-aggressing and judging my emotions, I learned how to see them as data. I learned how to view them as something that's helping me to understand myself and my environment. So it's feedback, okay? 2, giving harm a seat at the table. So rather than seeing the struggles that I experience as a mistake, I integrate them into my worldview and recognize their role in my growth and my evolution, okay? 3, rooting myself deeply in a productive, non-dual spiritual worldview. So my study of classical Shakta Tantra and the philosophy of grace, Anugraha, helped me contextualize pain within a greater reality, which allows me to move through states like depression with faith rather than fear, okay? This is what we learned today. Looking back, my most intense depression came when I was out of alignment with myself, trying to be something that I'm not. And that's a key insight that I want you to take away from this talk. If you're feeling chronically low, you might be living inauthentically in some way. And so your emotions are trying to tell you something about your alignment, okay? If you want to dive deeper into any of these ideas that I shared today, like I said, I explore them extensively in my talk Grace 101, which you can listen to for free on my Patreon. You just have to become a free member. And if you're looking for guidance on integrating spirituality into your daily life, like more hands-on and personal, I offer one-on-one mentorship. And regardless of whatever choice you make, Patreon, working with me one-on-one, I have a library of 50 plus talks that cover everything on the spiritual path, from personal growth to non-dual philosophy, and all of the links for this stuff are in the description, okay? So ultimately, healing isn't about making depression disappear. It's about shifting how we engage with it. When we stop fighting what's natural and instead learn how to work with it, we gain access to something even more valuable than happiness, which is peace, okay? So if you're still here listening to me right now after over an hour of talking, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to hear any feedback that you have, any aha moments you had during this talk in the comments. And just so there's no confusion about my Patreon, when you sign up, I will send you a workbook in the mail. You get this workbook that I designed in the mail, okay? And it's a guidebook for 24 of my talks. It's a journal. And it's awesome. People love it. But if you don't want the workbook and you just want to listen to my talks, you can just opt out of mail benefits when you sign up. So I always like to say that so people know that they don't have to get the workbook. And I will send it to you wherever you are in the world, by the way, not just the United States. I send them to Australia the other day. That's really cool. So that's all you need to know. I would love to hear your feedback in the comments, and thank you so much for sticking around if you made it here to the end. All right, I appreciate you. Jai Ma.